Hi, everyone. Welcome to Is She New, a podcast where we talk about mental health, vulnerability, and all real life experiences that people go through but nobody talks about. I am with my amazing husband today, and today we are going to be talking about men in therapy and men's mental health. As always, if you haven't already, go follow the podcast as well as you can.
I had to sniffle and I didn't want it to be in the recording.
As well as follow along on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube under Tierney's Journey, which is TIERNEYS Journey. So, as always, I like to say we are not professionals in this field. We're just talking about our own personal experiences. And Moose will be making appearances throughout this because he loves to be next to us. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Go get
Oh, his tail is going to knock everything over.
Oh my goodness. He's like what is it? It's like you ever watch Rugrats growing up? There's a scene in Rugrats where they have like this toy dinosaur that just like stomps on all the small like buildings and stuff in the episode. And I feel like he's like that small dinosaur that stomps on
like
everything.
Whenever they have this like small towns with the cats like going like Godzilla
Yeah,
over
it's that
top
same
of it.
gist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, let's get into it. So, tell me about the first time in your life that you can recall experiencing struggles with your mental health.
I think the first time that I was cognitively aware of maybe being like chronically sad is probably the best way to put it. I wasn't exactly aware that it was a mental health problem that I had, but it was more just like I said, like chronically sad. Like it was very difficult for me to build myself out or take myself out of this state. And I think I was probably a freshman in high school, and I'd been a athlete or like a swimmer my entire life, and so that was like a really big part of my identity. And I started to swim freshman year of high school, and I realized that I didn't like swimming that much, and for some reason I had this like concept in my head that like I could only do swimming because this is all that I've trained up for, and so I can't switch now. Like it's just my primary thing. It's who I am. And so luckily I had swam with like really great guys. They were all like my best friends, and they kind of got me through a lot of high school. But I just remember the end of my swim season, my freshman year of high school, and I was extremely sick. I think I just had the flu, like borderline pneumonia, and I just like kept pushing myself, and I was out of school for I think 3 or 4 days, but the only requirement to participate in our like final meet was that you had to be at school the day of or the day before. And so I just sucked it up and I went to school that day, and I went to the meet Friday night, and I did all right. And then Saturday, I remember just being exhausted, and I just couldn't get it out of my head of how much like I hated living, and like with retrospect, it's very easy for me to be like, oh, I was 15 and I didn't quite understand just how much life actually like had in store for me. I didn't realize how much of my life was not swimming, how much my identity was not swimming. However, to me at the time, it felt very real and it felt very constricting. And so I remember I had just like gotten like a big personal record. I'd gotten the team a whole lot of points. It was the best that the district's team had done in years. The way that like high school swimming works is that like or divisions I should say, is that you have like AAA, AA, quadruple A, whatever, and the more A's you have basically means the more the more difficult it is to compete. And we had just moved up a division to AAA from AA from the prior year, and we did really, really well unexpected. And so like I remember leaving, the team was happy, my dad was happy. I was just completely shot, and I was walking out of the it was at the high school that we had to meet at. I left the locker room and I met up with my dad, and we're walking back to his car, and he's like congratulating me, like saying he's super proud of me, and I'm just like bawling my eyes out. And it was just a combination of just exhaustion and just being, like I said, chronically sad over the course of like a few months prior to then, as well as being sick and just feeling like I didn't want to like exist in that moment. And it took a really long time for me to get out of it. And part of the reason why I got out of that was because I just wasn't swimming at that time because the season was over. And I that feeling recurred every swim season, until I quit my sophomore year of college. So, but I think the difference between like the chronic sadness and what I would call probably depression is because I didn't feel immobilized by it. I just more so felt confined to the role that I had to fulfill, or at least what I thought I had to fulfill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Your patch is like sliding down.
My eye patch is falling
other one,
down?
the other
The other one. You can fix it.
Brief intermission.
I feel like it's covering half my eye. I'm going to be like squinting and like the...
I think you just don't like the sensation
I don't.
of having an under eye patch. So with this experience, like your feelings of like sadness and just like being tired and not wanting to do it anymore, did you express like those feelings to anybody, like your friends or your dad or?
No, I think I have cop-out answers for everything. I feel like everybody does. What I mean by that is that if somebody were asking me like, oh, how are you? Like my immediate answer was always like, oh, I'm tired, but like, I'm fine. Like I'll get through it. Or like even like, I'm fine. I get through it. Those are phrases that are very canned, and it's very easy just to throw out that will divert other people from asking further questions about how you actually feel. And so like oh, I'm tired, or like, I get through it. Or even nowadays, like I feel like I've just shifted that. I mean, I think I'm better at handling my mental health nowadays, but like I shifted that to like, you know how it is, or like I try my best, like those kinds of things. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't consciously talk about it, or purposefully talk about it until I got to college. But before then, I would always kind of like, I would tell my parents this, and I don't blame my parents for the reaction because they were very supportive. And I'd also, like as a child, had a really hard time like committing to things that I wanted to do. And so like, my parents always just tried to push me to stay at least like committed to something that I told myself that I would do. And so I got to the point where it's like, oh, I really liked hanging out with my friends, and I really liked, I did like swim meets. I liked winning. I liked being good at swimming, right? And so I would get to the beginning of a season and I would talk to my parents about it. We'd get the sign up and everything. And it wasn't really, I didn't perceive it as an option. And it was just something that I like, oh, I know some seasons coming up. It's just something that I have to do. And so it wasn't until I got to college when I was severely depressed, and it started impacting the things that I did enjoy doing. So like, for example, like, I really, really loved my classes, and I was spending 36 hours of my week being a collegiate swimmer and not really focusing on my classes. So, I mean, I'm a good like bullshitter. Like I can get, sorry, should I not curse on the podcast? I'm a good BSer. I can like, I can like, I can get any assignment to pass, and like, I'll get an A on it. I'll be fine. Right. But if I wanted to actually learn, like going to college and spending like what Messiah's like $50,000 a year on a degree, I wanted to actually know what I was studying. And swimming did not allow for me to do that. So it took all of my like hatred of swimming and my frustration with not learning what I wanted to learn in my degree, and just being, again, like how it was my freshman year of high school, chronically tired. I was sick all the time. I just I didn't like anybody. I didn't like a lot of people on my team. And it caused me to just bottle it up a lot. And I remember, as awful as the pandemic was, and as awful as I still I have people in my personal life that I mourn that lost from the pandemic. However, I am extremely grateful for the time that it made me, that allowed for me to take a step back. Like those courses that I took during the COVID semester when we were at home, I loved some of those classes, like with Dr. Myers, that American history class. I started seeing a therapist then. And a lot of that just kind of made me realize what was important in my life and what wasn't. It's also the time I figured out that I wanted to marry you. And so a lot of things kind of just lined up, and my role as a swimmer and my identity as a swimmer just wasn't that anymore. And I realized that I can be multiple things, and that one thing does not kind of define me. Mm-hmm. So to go back to kind of your original question of well, who did I tell? It's I didn't tell anybody until it started to really cripple me. And mm-hmm. then that's kind of when I realized I needed to find an outlet.
When you were growing up, did you feel like it was a comfortable or normal thing for you to talk about your emotions with your friends or with your parents, specifically growing up to high school, not including college?
I was taught to show affection very easily. And I think my parents come from a generation where showing affection was, no, I shouldn't say frowned upon, because I feel like my grandparents came from a generation where you didn't tell your son you loved them, right? So then my parents still felt the after effects of that, where they weren't told often that their parents were proud of them. Or I'm sure there were also times where they also didn't feel directly loved because of the things that their parents would say. And so when my parents raised my sister and I, they went out of their way to show us how to love somebody and how to support somebody. I, as somebody growing up, I had interpreted that as, or I had obtained those skills, but I didn't learn really any other emotion or any other way of communicating. So I have a tendency to turn off a lot of my emotions when I speak, and I more so just kind of tell either directly what the subject is that I'm talking about, or I just avoid the things that made me upset. So I hate confrontation, which is really hard as a teacher to be mm-hmm. to be non-confrontational. And so I don't think I directly told people how I felt unless it became utterly necessary. Mm-hmm. I remember, I think it was my sophomore year of high school. I was still adjusting to Jordan being fully moved out. That's my sister. When she moved out for college, we just put down my family dog. I think Pop-Pop was my grandfather was in the hospital for a period of time, and I was in the middle of a swim season, and all of those came together. And I remember, I think my aunts were over or something, and they were having a good time, and all of those things for some reason just kind of came to the front of my head, and I excused myself. I went upstairs and I just cried for a few hours, and people were oh, what happened to him? Where'd he go? And so then I remember hearing a few people come up the stairs to eventually to come and knock on my door, and I had a water bottle on my desk, and I remember just showering my face with water so it wouldn't look like I was crying. It was just it looked like I had just spilled water on my face, which to 16-year-old Caleb was oh, this is a good idea. But to that just seems dumb. I don't know how they interpreted that, but I would do anything to avoid talking about negative emotions on my end. With my friends, I mean, I always tell my friends that I love them, but I've picked that up more so just because my dad being like a 911 dispatcher, and he's gotten like tragic calls of like people dying, and so then he'll tell him like my sister and I and my mom and I like stories of like he'll always tell us that he loves us because he never knows when like the last moment will be. And so like that seems like dire and extreme, but it's also, I mean, it's very true. So like whenever I see like my friends, like regardless of whether or not they're guys, or even if I'm really that close with them, like I'll tell them that I love them, because I think it's helpful to know that that people matter to you. But anything negative, I have like that's the gist of what I'm saying, is I have a really hard time doing that.
When you were growing up, do you feel like if you were to like cry or talk about like being upset, that there was like negative connotation to it, like that you'd be like, you know, man up, like boys don't cry kind of stuff like that? Not even specifically like your family, but just like friends at school, other encounters.
I think definitely in school. I mean, that's like I think it's probably changed a lot recently, but like when we were growing up, like that was definitely the verbiage that was used of like, oh, like boys don't cry kind of thing. So like I didn't feel that. I don't think I felt that pressure directly. But I mean, by the time I got to middle school is when I realized, like, I didn't know why I had these thoughts, but I was like, I feel like I shouldn't cry in public. You know what I mean? Like, nobody's ever told me like, oh, you shouldn't be crying right now. Does that make sense? And even with like my family, I don't think that I avoided those emotions because somebody told me I shouldn't be feeling those emotions or I shouldn't communicate those emotions. I just don't think my family modeled that for me. I don't blame them. I mean, that's just also how they were raised. I just don't think that was modeled for me, and therefore it took a really long time for me to learn how to do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I remember having kids in middle school, specifically like guys in middle school that would cry, and like if they cried, people would talk about it all the time and be like, oh, they're so emotional, like they're crying all the time, like they're a crybaby.
Yeah, so I might have subconsciously picked something like that up, or I mean, I also just could not remember.
Yeah, I remember if somebody cried, like that was like talked about forever. Like they didn't let that go in middle school.
Yeah.
So I think that there's like at least was a negative connotation on it for our grade.
Yeah.
I'm sure there still is, but
yeah, I mean, I try so I'm a middle school teacher, and I try to shut that down real fast. Like if I see like a kid like crying like in my classroom, I try to fully assess the situation, but I always offer them like an outlet of saying like, hey, like you can like sit and gather yourself for a second, you can go take a walk, do what you got to do. But like if I hear like the slightest thing of somebody else making fun of somebody for crying or showing like emotion in class, like that's like, I don't know, like I feel like I'm very chill. I'm very relaxed in the classroom, but that's like one of the very few like icks or like ticks that I have where it's just like I need to shut that down.
When was your first time going to therapy, and what was that experience like?
My first time going to therapy was my freshman year of college. It was right after swim season. So that's probably late February of like 2020. So I think I had 3 in-person therapy sessions, and then the rest were online because of COVID. So my first one, I should say, okay, it started out as counseling and it morphed into therapy. And the reason why is because the person that I was seeing was offered by Messiah University. They give you free counseling because they have a master's in counseling. You meet with a grad student. They have to get a certain amount of hours. Once they get their amount of hours, then they become a professional counselor, and then you reassign. Okay. Well, my person just got to their max amount of hours for all my in-person sessions, and they had recommended me to therapy. And so then I got I got a therapist that was through the free therapy program, whatever Messiah offers. And so I got an actual like licensed therapist through the Angle Center, the health center, whatever. And then from then on, I had like phone call, like therapy sessions. And I did that for probably 4 or 5 months. I think it was 4 or 5 months until sophomore year started. And that was, yeah. So I guess probably from March until August about.
And what was like the reason that you started to go? Like what made you finally start to go to therapy?
Similar to my feelings of freshman year of high school, I felt like I talked about it earlier. Yeah. Like I felt like I couldn't keep up with my classes. I felt like I wasn't learning anything. I felt like I was wasting money, as well as, I felt like I was failing you, like as like a boyfriend at the time, because I had been so consumed in some other things. And so I wasn't totally sure if I was at the time, like even like right for you, or like if I was in like a mental state to have like at that point an adult relationship. And that's when you had moved in full time with my family. And so all of those different like things in my life, I just had a really hard time keeping track of everything. And so I had talked with my roommate, and he and I both were like, we should probably go see somebody, because like the conversations we would have with each other, we both were just not doing well. And there's more than just that, but it's also just like it helped having somebody to hold me accountable. And so I remember he and I both signed up the same day, and then from then on, like we just kind of like morphed into more of a independent side of mine. So, and then just from then, I guess those sessions just continued to build on. The counselor sent like her notes and stuff over to my therapist, and so then it kind of just continued from there. And it wasn't like directive like therapy. Like it wasn't like they were trying to work on anything. We weren't trying to work on anything specific. It was more just, how was your week? Can you focus on using these prompts to describe how you feel? And over time, like I got a little frustrated with it, because I felt like, okay, I've used these prompts like a million times and I don't quite get it. And that's ultimately what ended up stopping it, as well as starting school again. I felt like I was too busy, which is an awful reason to stop therapy, is that because you get too busy. And I just didn't see the point at the time. But I mean, like, it was so helpful, because like even now, like I still use some of those prompts. Like, I just like I think I used it earlier today in one of the conversations we had, where it was like, I physically take a step back, I take a big breath in, and then I think for a second, and then I respond with, okay, X topic, and here is why reason. Does that make sense? Just because like I didn't have that communication framework like for emotions prior to therapy. So
Do you feel like there was like a stigma at the time for like men going to therapy, like especially like college age?
Yeah, I think probably in broader society, no. I think in a Christian campus, yes. I think a lot of the reason why I struggled to like realize that I needed to talk to somebody is because I was always taught, oh, if you have problems, you just need to pray about it. Like pray your problems away. And I'm not saying prayer is a bad thing. It's just that's not realistic. Like it's I believe that God is a big God, and he can do anything in his will. However, there are points to which like God gives you a therapist and you should use the therapist. It's like so it took a lot for me to like realize theologically that it was okay to talk to somebody else other than God, like about my problems. And the fact that like, God guided people to develop this profession in therapy in order to aid people that need therapy. And to get back to your point of like of stigmas, I think there's, like I said, 100% like a really big stigma in the Christian community. I've always had like a really easy time breaking like cultural social norms of like just doing whatever I want to do to make myself happy. I've had a really hard time breaking Christian social norms and like doing like what I believe the church preached And it wasn't until I got to college when I realized that, the church can be really messed up, and I should be able to interpret my theology and my faith the way that I feel like best furthers my relationship with Jesus, as opposed to what the church is telling me is wrong, like therapy.
Yeah, I think that's like an interesting point because I mean, I remember in college when I started therapy, like even as a female, I remember like trying to rush into therapy so that like
Nobody would
I
see you
wouldn't
there.
see anybody
Yeah.
that I knew because
Yeah.
I didn't want people to be like, at the time, it felt like so taboo to be like, oh, she's in therapy, like,
Yeah.
and that's what it felt like. But like, really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal at all. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's hard. It's not a big deal, I think, for us because we've gone through the therapy
yeah.
process. I think I resonate with that a lot because the in-person counseling that I went to for the 3 times I went, that was held in, I can't remember the name of that building, Hofstadter or something. Well, it was torn down. Before it was torn down, it was this like sore thumb building in the center of our college campus, and so the only thing that building was used for was for counseling and for accounting. And my butt wasn't going in for accounting, so like I was seeing somebody for therapy or counseling. And so I would literally I would schedule my appointments at like the most busy times throughout the day, so like I think like 1 or 2 o'clock when I knew everybody else was in class. So I would have, where I worked in the library, it was just a very easy way for me to walk over and then go right there. And even when I moved therapy to online or to just phone calls, most of my phone calls were when I was working for the government. Like on my drives into work, I would literally that's when I'd have my sessions, which God bless my therapist for being awake at 7 o'clock in the morning to have appointments.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that it obviously it's hard to go to therapy in this like situations because you feel like that societal pressure and like judgment. But when I'm saying like it's not that big of a deal, I don't mean like therapy's not important or like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I mean like the world's not going to end if you go to therapy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and if people judge you for that, then that's like a shame on them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like nothing on you. I think that it's so beneficial to go to therapy. So besides therapy, did you use any other resources at the time?
My biggest aid was just talking to somebody. So like therapy. And those prompts kind of just helped me realize what I wanted in life. And so like when I quit swimming, my sophomore year of college, I kind of just told my parents outright. I think I told them through a text because I didn't want to have to I didn't feel ready to talk to them about it. And then I told my coach, and I was like, hey, I sent her an email. I was like, hey, can I set up a meeting to sit down with you and discuss next season? And I think she had an idea that I was gonna quit. And so we had met, and in the meeting I would immediately cut to the point. I was like, look, I'm quitting, I'm not coming back. And then she asked me why, what are the reasons, trying to diagnose or whether or not I would stay on the team. And I was just like, I'm not ready to talk about that at this time. I think I'm just gonna leave. And then I walked over onto the pool deck and I took out the stuff, all of my Messiah given equipment, and then I gave it back to her. And then we talked for maybe a little bit longer about some other things that happened on the swim team as to what she thought would contribute to me leaving. And then I left. And then that was it. So
Very good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's something I know that this is kind of people have different opinions about it, but I think that I'm a pro quitting person. Obviously you should try your best and try because it takes time to be good at something, but if it's really draining your mental health, your social time, you don't have time to do things that you enjoy, I don't see there being a problem in quitting, because then you're wasting time that you could be doing things that you really enjoy doing. So
I believe in commitment to what makes you happy. And so like for something non-essential like swimming that didn't make me happy, it was like I think that was the biggest step, is I gave myself permission to quit. And like even now, like I love my job, but I would never sit here and say like, oh, if I was a millionaire, I would still work. Like my butt would be gone. I'm buying an island or a cottage in Ireland
I
or
think
something.
that's like a very extreme example of what I'm saying, though.
It,
Like,
it is.
I'm saying,
Well, the reason why I say that is because of like that's my philosophy though, where it's like that's just like that's how I have to compartmentalize it in order to continue to give myself permission to follow like what is going to make me happy.
yeah, I feel like on the kind of opposite side of that is like you're win millions of dollars, whatever. Like, if you like to still do your job, like if you're a teacher and you still like being a teacher, then still be a teacher. Like,
Sure.
yeah. So, overall, how do you think your emotional intelligence has changed from like the time of being a kid to now?
Well, from being a kid, I would say like yes, my emotional intelligence has grown. However, I would still probably view myself as less emotionally intelligent as probably like my peers or like people my age, which is hard to kind of like wrestle with a little bit on my end. Like I think um I don't know if I attribute it to like me just being stubborn and like these are my beliefs and like sure I'm willing to adjust those beliefs, but like if people go against them, I have a hard time. Like it goes back to my idea of like I just have a really hard time with confrontation. Um I feel like I'm good at processing other people's feelings. Like I've gotten better over time as being like, okay, when does somebody need just somebody to talk to and when does somebody need advice? And I've gotten better at asking those types of questions so that I know that I'm not trying to fix somebody's problems when they don't want their problems to be fixed at that moment in time. And they just want to think about it for a second. And they also want like their own opinions about it, not somebody else's opinions. Um, what I meant was like for my own like emotional regulation, I have a hard time still communicating kind of how I feel. Like my initial response is to shut down and to just go through the motions. Like if I have like something that's emotionally daunting in front of me, I'd rather just be like I'll explain it in terms of like my normal routines now. Like if I have something emotionally daunting and I got home from work and I don't want to deal with something, I'm just going to take Moose on a walk. I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to make dinner. I'm going to clean up and I might sit and scroll on my phone and then go to bed early. Like that's, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to deal with it. I just go through my emotions of what I do. It takes normally somebody to intervene outside of my own brain to be like, you need to talk about this.
Yeah. And I think sometimes though, like it's good to sit and just process things first for a little bit, as long as like, because some people need to do that. Like some
Yeah,
people can't share stuff right away and they just need to be like alone for a little bit to like sit with it before they
I
are able
think.
to talk about it. And I don't think that there's really anything wrong with that specifically, but like if you're just like, no, I'm just not going to talk about it, I'm just going to lay down and just like that's going to be it
Yeah.
until like I can move on to something else, then I think that's like not beneficial for you.
Well, see, that's my issue is
Yeah.
that like that's my avoidant tendency of like I just like that's what I want to do. Like there was a time when like you and I thought about like moving and I mean like obviously that's still like a possibility that like I can like like I can think about for the future, but at the time I just that's not something that I wanted to talk about. Like I
Yeah.
was like I think that was probably like what like last February and March,
Yeah.
and so then like it took a lot for me to be able to just like sit and talk with you about it, and I don't think I could have done that without you being supportive of like hey you like we need to talk about this kind of thing.
Well,
So
I also though was like in therapy a bunch then, because that was like right around the time where I was like the most depressed. Like I was like I
yeah,
need change. Like I for like my sanity. Like I feel like I need to like know what my options are.
yeah,
And like that was something that my therapist really encouraged me to do, because like I know we've talked about that kind of stuff like over the past like 8 years a couple times,
Mm-hmm.
but like I think it's always like, oh yeah, like da da da, and that was like the first like, no, we actually like really need to like figure out like how we feel about these things,
Mm-hmm.
because I know like Caleb has a hard time with change. So like these versus like my life was so chaotic that I feel like I don't really like react to change as much. Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't bother me as much as it does for you. So
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, that's like, to take a step back, like that's ultimately like another reason why you should go to therapy, is because it benefits the people around you. And so, um, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard. Like, thinking about like maturity and emotional education, like, how you yourself have progressed,
mm-hmm.
and kind of where you still need assistance in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, right now, like this isn't very easy for me. Not to like talk about. I'm comfortable talking about it, but it's hard for me to find words to communicate how I have experienced like emotional maturity growth.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, like you're not used to like talking about it
Yeah.
super often, so it's like you kind of know what you like are going through in your head, but like
Yeah.
you don't know how like the words to put together to make it make sense
Yeah.
to somebody else.
It's very easy for me to verbalize like gym growth. Like I can, like those are gains that I can see or I can feel, like physically, and see the numbers, but it's very difficult for me to do that like emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and little trigger warning for people who are listening. I'm going to be talking about suicide, so if that is triggering for you, feel free to pause here. Um, but I want to talk about kind of suicide with men, because suicide is the leading cause of death in men under 50, which is huge. And men are four times more likely to die by suicide than women. And a lot of that is because men are less likely to get diagnosed, they're less likely to ask for help. Um, and that leads to thinking you only have one option. And I know a lot of people are nervous about talking to providers about it, and sometimes, depending on what provider you go to, they may not take men as seriously in those aspects, which is horrible. And you know, you just got to keep going to find somebody that's more comfortable. I think now it's easier because I feel like a lot more people are more like aware and sensitive to that. But like when we were younger, I feel like it wasn't like a big thing as
Mm-hmm.
much to talk about. Um, and men also, like, it's kind of shifting more so now, which is good, but I feel like there's always a perspective of men being like your protector, like they're supposed to look out for women, for the kids, like be the one to be like tough, like hold everything together, like whether that's financially, emotionally, physically. And I feel like that's like one of the big factors that leads to men not wanting to like express these feelings to anybody, because they don't want to look like they are weak or that they're not able to take care of or support like their family, and that they feel like a burden in some ways. But in reality, I think it's makes you more stronger to talk about your emotions and like open up about that, because you're growing your emotional intelligence and your ability to communicate with people. And like Caleb said earlier, like it's so beneficial even if you don't have any problems to go to therapy, because it helps somebody else open up, because then you can initiate those kind of conversations with people that you feel like you can tell there's something off with, but they don't really like say anything. So that's just something to keep in mind, as well as men. Obviously, there's some overlap between symptoms of like depression, anxiety with men and women, but some of the more specific to men I have listed here. So, escapist behavior, such as spending a lot of time at work or sports. Physical symptoms like headaches, digestive problems, pain. A big thing is substance abuse is a big, a high risk factor for men. Controlling or violent or abusive behavior, anger, irritability, aggressiveness, or inappropriate anger. Risky behavior such as reckless driving, noticeable changes in mood, energy level, or appetite, difficulty concentrating, feeling restless or on edge. Yeah, so men are more likely to participate in things that are dangerous or like unhealthy coping mechanisms than they are to talk to providers about their symptoms. So, drinking, doing drugs, speeding, like that kind of stuff, which, yeah, is important to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, like I can tell you, like anecdotally, like a lot of those things are perceived by men as easier to do than to talk about their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially on the terms of being like self-reckless, like being able to like take your own life into your own hands because you perceive that you can control that risk, whereas you perceive that you cannot control your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like as well as like to take a step back towards like men not being treated differently within like medical space. I don't think it's not an exclusively like a male issue, but I think obviously like it is still a male issue. But I think it's like a societal empathy problem,
Mm-hmm.
and that like I think a lot of times in America we have a hard time giving grace and love to other people, and it's very easy to dismiss somebody else's feelings and thoughts because of your perception of them. And so a lot of times men are perceived to be, like you said, like that strong figure within like the family, dynamic, yeah. Or even in terms of society, like in like a strong male in the workforce, a strong male in the classroom, a strong male in whatever, right? It's very difficult when that label has already been put on you to break that label.
Mm-hmm.
And like again, that's not exclusively a male problem, but I think the way that men process and think leads to those self-reckless behaviors. And because suicide is the ultimate self-reckless behavior, it's very easy for men to say like, okay, I can control whether or not I'm going to feel these emotions in the future if I no longer exist.
Yeah. And men are also more likely to use more lethal methods for suicide, which is also part of the reason why they're 4 times more likely to die from suicide, even though women attempt more,
Mm-hmm.
because men are more likely to use like firearms and stuff like that. Um, to kind of close this out, what is one thing that you would tell your younger self about like your experience or men's mental health?
Specifically being a man, a lot of the way that I was raised to be a man was to think critically and to endure. I say the first one, think critically, because I felt like it was the responsibility for the men in my life to solve issues quickly. And then the endure, because you're going to run into a lot of problems in life and you need to be able to handle them and get through to see tomorrow. Which I think those are two independently very wise and helpful mindsets, but when combined can force you to perpetuate the same things I was speaking of earlier, where you disassociate, you avoid, you don't like to confront the negative like emotions that you're feeling. So what I would tell my younger self is to take those two traits and those two like pieces of wisdom and make sure that you add in those spaces to speak about your emotions. What that means practically would be like I dedicate at least one activity in my day that I know will make me happy. Like I try to set it as early in the day as possible so that I know like, okay, as long as I get to that eventual thing, I know that I succeeded in taking at least a little bit of time for me today. And so like that goes back to my idea of being like a man to endure, right? I have to wake up early. I have to go to work. I know that I need to work in order to provide for the lifestyle that you and I have, as well as I know that when I get home from work, I need to make sure that I take care of Moose because that's a responsibility I have. I also know that I need to like make dinner. I know that I need to do X, Y, and Z of whatever chore I have to do. But as long as I get like that time while I'm walking Moose to listen to a new audiobook that I got, or I take that time after I cook dinner to sit and watch a show, or I take that time to do whatever, as long as I set it up early in the day that I am looking forward to get to and doing that one thing that makes me happy. And as long as I can do that, that's kind of like that's how I'm able to balance a lot of that. So what I would tell my younger self, especially that myself that was dealing with a lot of those emotions with no longer being identifying as like an athlete and finding new ways to identify myself, or being able to see like a therapist or being able to like willingly discuss my like negative emotions, would just to be like, okay, find things that you practically can do, and that will assist a lot of other things in your life.
Yeah. And if you have any emotions, feelings that you are worried about, you can always contact. There's so many therapists. You can do online, in person, support groups. I think 988 is the suicide hotline number.
That's a suicide hotline. We're going to insert here the men's aid hotline.
Okay, the National Mental Health Hotline is 866-903-3787. And then they also have like a couple ones if you just look up for veterans, for trans, substance abuse. There's like a whole bunch of ones that if you just put in like a little Google search, you can get support that way. Thank you for watching. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. And go ahead and like and follow and rate the pod 5 stars. I hope everybody's having a great week. And by the time this is posted, it'll be 2 weeks till Christmas. So I hope that everybody's enjoying their holiday season, even if you don't celebrate Christmas. So
I also hope you enjoy our pajamas. Got them from Target.
Yes, we got
matching
them from
pajamas.
Target. Matching pajamas.
The matching eye masks.
Yep.
Eye masks are cool.
Yep. Little tree here, if you can see that.
Ta-da.
But all right, everybody have a great week. Bye.